Can you guys hear me? Is that a yes? Anyone?
Yes.
Yes.
I can hear you. Hello.
Hello.
Awesome, guys. All right, we'll get started in a few moments. Let me get my computer set up here. Thank you so much for being on the call. Some exciting stuff, guys, that I'm going to be providing you with the purchase agreement, how to navigate, how to negotiate, but ultimately how to get your offer accepted. You know, with the 23 years of experience that I've been doing this, you know, one of the things that I've learned is having the ability to have a conversation to lock in that potential offer accepted. The goal is to get your offer accepted, get your foot in, okay? That's the main goal. You know, what happens a lot of times, guys, that I see so much that happens is the agents put too much information on their purchase agreement that ultimately alters the position that the seller and the listing agents just feel a little adamant about, you know, considering your offer. You know, and we see a lot of rejections. You know, the goal is to at least have a consideration and ultimately a counter or an acceptance. The number one thing is to get an acceptance. But if it's not an acceptance, at least get a counter to kind of give you that perspective that you're still part of the game, okay? So that's the key component. And I'm so grateful, guys, that I have the opportunity to help Kim Mosley teach the contract class, but I'm going to give you my perspective and ultimately give you an avenue on how we can approach the purchase agreement. I think last time we left off on part one of the purchase agreement, so I'm going to share my screen real quick and go to my purchase agreement. All right. All right, guys, I'm not sure. Can you see my my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Beautiful. All right, let me see who's on the call. All right, so last time that we talked, we were going through the purchase agreement. We went through the navigations that Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who is your client, you were submitting an offer on 123 ABC Street. You were submitting an offer for 1.2 million, a 30-day escrow. We went with the motion that the broker who's representing the seller is Century 21. And then Keller Williams South Bay, Simon as the buyer's agent. We put, you know, the DRE license. The one thing that I would like to stress, guys, the importance of understanding the dynamics of the purchase agreement is put it as if it's a resume. Put it like if it's a resume. What do I mean by that? What are you talking about, Simon? What I'm saying, guys, is a resume is something similar to what a purchase agreement looks like. When you're going for that phenomenal six-figure potential job and you're presenting your resume, the first thing you want is for whoever is going to be looking over your resume, that one, it's clean, concise with experience, and it's not all over the place. You know, if there is any grammar, anything missing, then what's going to happen with your resume, it's going to be tossed on a section that they're not considering your resume. You want to be on the pile, right? The pile that allows you to go to the next interview for a face-to-face interaction with that potential employer. That's the same component in your purchase agreement, guys. You have to have a fine approach in how this purchase agreement looks like. I'm a very stickler when it comes to the purchase agreement. If you are leaving any blanks, I suggest always put NA. It's not applicable, it's not included, it's not part of this agreement. The reason I say this because one, it educates you to ultimately make sure that you're not missing anything. One of the things that I see a lot, guys, is the APN number. Your parcel number is always missing. This is an important component that is always necessary to add to the purchase agreement. This is what we call the social security to the property that identifies the parcel. We don't need to know the address. As long as we have the APN number, then that's all we need. That will identify the property at 123 ABC Street, for example, okay? So make sure that the APN number matches the address and do not fail to not include it on there, okay? I'll give you a war story, okay? And when I say war stories, guys, it's a very common concept that I used when I was teaching real estate school, when I was teaching real estate contracts. When I refer to war stories, it's something that has happened to me or has happened to one of our agents. It can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing, but war stories is what I like to share with you guys as an example. So one of our agents failed to put the correct APN number. So they put, for example, 1234-56 566789 should have been it, but they put 84 instead. And what happened is not just the escrow failed to see that, but title also failed to see that. And that APN number was attached to a residential lot, a residential, single-family residential property. But also that number was attaching a parcel, a vacant lot on the side that was not supposed to be included as part of the agreement. So the lot size that we were trying to sell was the single-family residence. The seller did not want to sell a 4,000 lot that was used for one of the sellers. I think it was a brother or a sister was using it as a garden. That was not part of the agreement, and somehow they incorporated both those APN because that number identified the lot and not necessarily the residential. But the address was correct, but the APN wasn't. So what ended up happening, guys, was not just that the house sold, but the lot also, the 4,000, which was about $100,000 to $200,000 worth, was incorporated into the sale of the house. And when everyone realized what had happened, it had already recorded, and officially the buyer ended up getting also that vacant land. And there was a big mess, a big lawsuit, and we went back. The seller ended up suing not just escrow but title, and we were also named on that claim, even though we did everything correct. We had the listing agreement, the APN correct. We had also included all the information that identified not just just the residential property. And there was language. Somehow the escrow company and title did not see it, and it was an oversight on their half that ultimately incorporated all. So now the buyer has not just the house, but an additional parcel that they're ultimately paying. So the seller was suing the buyer because the buyer says, nope, you know what? I'm not giving that back. That was part of the agreement. So now the buyer was using that as arsenal to ultimately retain that, because that was like $180,000, $200,000 worth of vacant land. And, eventually after years after back and forth, they ended up settling for a price that the new seller ended up selling it to the old seller back for like $80,000. The moral of the story, guys, be very careful. This APN number that you see, the assessor's parcel number, is very important, guys, because just one number, one digit can alter the position, and your buyer or seller may be buying something that is not even what they want, and now it opens up a can of worms. So just keep that in mind as we progress, guys, okay? The other thing that I wanted to share, I think we finished off at the end of the loan aspect of the RPA. One thing is where it says additional financing, okay? What goes there? What is that all about? Additional financing is any other terms that the buyer is asking of the seller to provide as an incentive. Well, Simon, what is that? What could it possibly be? Well, in section 3E, as in Edward, additional financing, what it is basically this, guys. If the buyer is asking any concessions, meaning is the buyer asking for a credit for closing costs? And that's typically one of the reasons they put additional finance terms is buyer is requesting that the seller pay an amount of 5,000, 10,000, 2%, 3% of buyer's recurring closing cost. That's where the language would go on there if the buyer is needing additional assistance with some closing costs. Where you're going to see this more often is on your VA or FHA buyers. Okay. So you got to be very careful when you check, if this is check a FHA or VA, then be eerie, because that's going to be where they're going to ask probably where they need some assistance on closing costs. Just because the buyer is going in with a very small amount, FHA 3.5, VA 0, zero down payment. But in this scenario, we're going to say that it's an FHA client. They may ask for concessions to help them because they just have enough to pay for a down payment. They don't have enough to actually pay the closing costs, and that can be up to another 2% of the purchase price. That can be another $10,000, $8,000, $15,000 of recurring closing costs. Now, this is where you're going to have the conversations with the lender, guys. Okay, when presenting an offer, you want to be crystal clear that you're having those conversations with the lender, because the lender is the one that's ultimately going to finance the balance. Okay, the first loan. You need to know that the buyer is ready, able, and willing to close on this, but you also need to know their finance position. Do they have enough means? This example that we use here, we used 1.2 million, which exceeds the FHA as an example, so we're not going to say that it's an FHA. The conventional, obviously, they have the means because they're putting, $370,000 at close of escrow on top of their this was another example that I used, but let's just say they put in 15,000 as a good faith deposit. The one thing that I have to stress, guys, the amount that's up here, section D, 1D, the $1.2 million, your deposit, and obviously we use this, and we're going to take this off because that was last time's conversation. We're not going to say there was an increase. So let's take this off. Okay. So with the price up here of 1.2, the deposit that you're putting at 15,000, and then the first loan of 800,000, what it's going to calculate is what the buyer needs to come in with to close this deal. This is the amount that the buyer will come in as additional funds to close this deal. Okay. Now, make sure that these numbers do coincide, because if this number 1.2 does not reflect the purchase price, then what's wrong is your arithmetic. Your math is wrong. So if there's something wrong, then you need to make sure that you correct. How do you do it? You basically eliminate all this. You take everything and then set it back to 0 and then start again. Maybe it's your arithmetic on the finance aspect of it. Or maybe there was a tweak here that you didn't realize, and that's giving you some wrong information. All right. And then the balance, obviously, which is section F, and section F, or F as in Frank, balance of down payment and purchase, which would be the remaining balance to bring into the table or into escrow to close this, and then ultimately close the deal. All right. Any questions on page 1 of the purchase agreement? I don't know. Is Rosie on the call? I can't see who's on the call. 7. Let me see. Is Rosie? No, she's not in here. We role played last time, and it was fun role playing with Rosie. All right. Let's continue to part 2 of the purchase agreement, guys. All right, so part two, verification of down payment. Obviously, that the offer gets submitted, you have what is called a provision time period, meaning that you can submit an offer without necessarily verifying that the buyer has the down payment to close this deal. But per the contract, section 3H and Henry, it says that the following down payment and closing, buyer or buyer's lender or loan broker pursuant to the paragraph of 3J1 shall within 3 days, guys, or you can modify and add an additional time frame, which can be 1 day, could be 2 days, or it could be 5 days. All right. But for the sake of argument today, we're going to only do that it's 3 days, guys, okay? Because that's the default amount is 3 days. Anything more than that will ultimately red flag the listing agent as like, okay, what's really going on here? So leave it at 3 days. Now, if you have the verification, which usually you should have the prequal letter, maybe the DU already approving this buyer, the purchase agreement, and proof of funds to put in the down payment, then you can put 0 days, meaning that you're presenting that right there. So there's no 3 days. You're presenting the offer already with the proof of funds, which would be ideal. Remember, as I mentioned earlier, guys, it's like a resume. The more you fill in, the more information you're providing the listing agent and the seller, the more compelling your story is to get your offer considered, okay? Or you can say here, verification of attachment, okay? So the verification is that you're attaching already the down payment. Appraisal contingency, all right? Right now, more so than ever, we're seeing a dramatic increase in multiple offers on the table. And obviously, it is a big concern when it comes to the appraisal because some properties are not appraising what the actual purchase price is. So be very, very, very careful. Do your research and do your own comps. If you're going to be representing the buyer, you know, you want to make sure that if you're going to be in a position to release that as a condition, guys, be prepared if the offer is less than what your buyers submitted, okay? For example, let's say that $1.2 million offer you submitted now is only 1.1 million. So there's a $100,000 discrepancy. And if the buyer is in the position to purchase this, then you should be okay. If the buyer is not in the position to do so, then my suggestion would be be very careful by releasing this as a condition, okay? So the agreement is or is not contingent upon a written appraisal of the property by a licensed or certified appraisal, no less than the purchase price. Buyer shall, as specified in paragraph 14B3 in writing, remove the appraisal contingency or cancel this agreement within 17 days. So the beauty is that it allows you under this condition, guys, 17 days to release this as a contingency. Now, here's the pros and cons on a very competitive market. There's a strategy that you can use in efforts to get your offer considered. And that strategy is very simple, okay? I don't really recommend it most times just because you got to know how to have that conversation with the buyer, and there may be a small cost to this. And that cost is the appraisal fee. Your average appraisal fee is anywhere from $500 to $700, depending on the price point. But let's say you're in a competing position. Obviously, you're not going to give any type of legal advice, but what you are going to give is information for the buyer to make a decision of where their position is. So if the buyer is in a position that they truly want this property and they're willing to go above what you feel may not appraise, then you can release that as a condition by saying that this is a condition that is not a contingency about appraising at the actual price. okay? Now the strategy and how you can do this, guys, it's a very simple concept that I've used, and I've educated some of the agents to ultimately get their offer accepted, because in the eye of a listing agent on the seller, they're saying, cool, if this property doesn't appraise, that means that the buyer cannot use this as an avenue to cancel escrow because they released this as a condition. Now, here's how you would approach this. You have to be on the same level of conversation with the lender. You got to get the lender to ultimately order the appraisal as soon as possible, sooner than you releasing physical inspections. Okay, I'm going to repeat this. It has to be a communication with the lender, and it has to be released or ordered before you release physical inspections. Now, physical inspections are 17 days as well. If you can keep it at 17, great, but if you have to reduce your physical inspections by less than 17 days and say 10 days, guess what? You got to order that appraisal. The appraisal has to go out there within that time frame of 10 days or less, 9 days or less, guys. But this is where you have to have a concise conversation with the lender to make sure that they can order this immediately, expedited immediately, so you can know exactly if it's going to appraise or not. Because let's say if it doesn't appraise, you at least know what the value is, but you haven't released physical inspections. You still have that as an avenue to exit, just in case the appraisal comes in way less than what you offer. What if the offer you submitted is 1.2, right? But the appraised value comes out to 1 million. There's a 200,000 discrepancy, right? Buyer may say, oh my gosh, I didn't expect 200,000 to be the number. That means I would have to come in with the difference in most cases, especially when it's a lower end price point, or excuse me, lower end down payment. Now, obviously, this changes the dynamics of it if the buyer is putting a larger amount of down payment. If there's a large down payment, your loan to value is a lot less because they're only financing this amount and they still have substantial equity on the property. Therefore, it's not a big risk to the lender. The reason the lenders request an appraisal is because in case that the buyer defaults, can the lender foreclose and retain at least the money that they've borrowed to the buyer? That's the only reason we use appraisals to evaluate where the purchase price needs to be. Now, by releasing this as a condition, as a strategy, guys, be prepared. I don't highly recommend it all the time, but on a competing market that we're seeing right now, you may have to be in competition with other buyers that are probably going to release that because they have substantial large down payment, or they're willing to pay the difference. I don't recommend this on an FHA or VA loan because they're coming in with very little amount of down payment. But at the end of the day, guys, it's really the buyer's discretion and the buyer's ability to perform, because they cannot use this. If they release appraisal contingency, they cannot use this as an avenue to cancel escrow because the appraised value did not come up to par. So be very cautious and educate your clients by, giving them the word of advice and how this condition works. Now, again, conversation is the key component to your success. Having that conversation with the lender will give you the ability to get that appraisal ordered immediately, get it out, get the appraisal out there to evaluate the home. And if it appraises, congratulations. Whew, you at least have the lender on your side and the buyer on your side. But let's say it doesn't appraise. If it's a small difference, then, if the buyer is willing to work something and pay the difference, then it's perfectly fine. But if there's a large discrepancy, guys, then that's your exit. meaning that, you know, if it's going to be too much of a gap, you may want to try to negotiate with the listing agent, but if it's a very seasoned agent like myself, I'm going to revert back and tell you, hey, Heather, you released appraisal contingency as part of your agreement. So therefore, I am not in the position, I can only ask the seller, but the seller will say, well, didn't the buyer release that as a condition? And the answer can be, yeah, you know what? The seller doesn't have to reduce their price because of the appraisal, especially if you release that as a condition, guys. So be very, very careful. But the exit strategy, if you have to be in that position, is get that appraisal as soon as possible, you know, and ultimately get the appraised value report and then determine where you need to stand. If it doesn't appraise where you think it should be, then this is an opportunity for you to exercise 14B of the purchase agreement. And you don't have to give a reason. All you have to do on the cancellation says due to buyer's position, they're exercising 14B of the purchase agreement to back out of the deal. That's all you have to do. Now, again, a listing agent who is seasoned and experienced may ask you, hey, you know, Jesse, what's the reason your buyer's backing out? You know, the buyers, after doing their due diligence on the property, they just felt compelled that, unfortunately, it has too many repairs. They just don't like the section of the property where it's located. I mean, there's so many different variables that you can use, but you have the right to exercise 14B. And by doing so, you can cancel and then retain the buyer's deposit. The only thing they're going to lose here is obviously their $500, $600 appraisal, and they have to order another one with another purchase offer that they submit. But at least you know that you've got your offer, you're in escrow, and you're hoping that for the best that the appraised value does come in. But if it doesn't come into par, then you can use that as an avenue. Any questions, guys? All right, no questions. All right, let's continue. So loan terms. So the loan application, again, is the same component, is that it already sets for 3 days, guys. All right, so the loan application is, let's say that you're in an open house, right? When we are able to do open houses again, a buyer comes in here, they're not being represented by anyone. They really, truly want this property. They're not working with an agent. They haven't been pre-qualified. Guess what? You can still draft a purchase agreement on their behalf and get the seller to accept. If that's the case, draft the offer. Don't go through the motions. Well, you need to get pre-qualified, then come back. That buyer may become a cold buyer because you had them right then and then that they were ready, willing, and able. So the avenue and how you approach this is a loan application that they have 3 days after acceptance. Buyer shall deliver to seller a letter from a buyer's lender or loan broker stating that they, based on the review of the buyer's written application and credit report, buyer is pre-qualified and pre-approved for a new loan specified in paragraph 3D. What does that mean? Is, let's say that things are back to normal, or you just happen to be showing a property and this consumer just happens to drive by and say, hey, are you the listing agent? No, I'm just showing the property. My clients are about 25 minutes late, but I can show you the property. Phenomenal. You get some information, they fall in love, and they are asking for you to submit an offer. They haven't been pre-qualified. You have 3 days. Submit the offer, and obviously get the lender involved immediately and ask the lender if we can get them pre-qualified. They'll run their application, their credit report, their income, their financials, and then they can give you a determination if this buyer is good or not. If the buyer is not good, you should know, and then ultimately, if your offer gets accepted, you can always cancel due to the buyer not qualifying for a loan. So the loan application under Section J allows you that 3 days, okay, 3 days of getting your offer accepted to ultimately get the buyer to get qualified for a loan, okay? If they're already pre-qualified, then obviously they're going to check off letter attached, meaning that they've already gone through the motions of screening, credit checks, income, tax returns, and they're ready to purchase. Then obviously you'll check off letter is attached with this offer. Now, loan contingency, which is the most important component to the entire dynamics of this agreement, guys. The loan contingency is the last layer that allows the buyer to hold as a condition. By releasing this last contingency in the whole process, what you're telling the seller and the listing agent that the buyer is moving forward and has met all the criteria to continue the process. Now, it also has a condition here that says the following, that buyers shall act diligently and in good faith to obtain the necessary designated loans, buyer qualification contingencies, or appraisal contingency have been waived or removed. Then failure of the property to appraise at the purchase price does not entitle the buyer to exercise the cancellation right pursuant to the loan contingency. A buyer is otherwise qualified for a specific loan, buyer contractually obligates regarding deposit, down payment, and closing costs are not contingency of this agreement. So you got to be very, very, very careful. And this is where section J3 comes into play, guys. Section J3, loan contingency removal within 21 days. Within 21 days after acceptance, buyer shall specify in paragraph 14 in writing, remove this as a condition, guys, okay? So you got to be very careful, guys, when approaching this last condition as well. This last condition is a very simple component, you know, that I've seen so many avenues. Don't be afraid to release loan contingency as long as you and the lender are both on the same page, okay? The lender is not going to tell you, okay, you can go ahead and release this as a condition. Who makes that decision? Anyone? No one wants to answer?
Agent?
No.
The buyer.
No. Why would the agent want to release this as a condition? Remember, the buyer's deposit is in jeopardy if you release the last of the contingencies. So the answer is yes, the buyer makes the decision to release this as a condition. Remember, they're the ones that have $15,000 in good faith escrow holding this for the purpose of closing this deal. So the buyer has to make that decision. And how you approach this conversation is very simple. Who wants to role play with me real quick? Anyone?
I'll do it.
Who's this?
It's Jesse.
Jesse, love it. Thank you, Jesse. All right, Jesse, I'm the agent and I'm your agent representing you on this purchase. You're purchasing at 1.2 million, okay? You're the buyer. And I'm going to explain the pros and cons by introducing you what a loan contingency is, okay? Hey, Jesse, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well, Simon. How are you?
Phenomenal, you know, working hard like always. Listen, in respect to the loan contingency, originally when we were discussing this back when, you know, we're at that verge now that the 21 days is just around the corner. We're 19 days in since we accepted this offers. You remember we had this discussion early on about the contingencies?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate our position here because we're again at the position where we're going to have to release this as a condition, okay? By releasing the loan contingency, what we're saying is even if you don't get approved for the loan, you may be in breach of the contract and forfeiting up to the $15,000. Remember, guys, I didn't say you're going to lose the $15,000 because remember, the problem with real estate agents kill the deal. And that's not the approach that we want to have with a buyer, because when we say you're forfeiting $15,000 in the mind of a buyer, what are they thinking? Oh my God, I'm going to lose my entire deposit. So the approach in the conversation is very simple, and this is how I would have the conversation with Jesse. Jesse, it's that time frame, 21 days is just around the corner. We have 19 days, we're 19 days in, we have 2 additional days to release this as a condition. By releasing this condition, what you're saying is that even if you do not qualify for the loan after, you may be in jeopardy of breaching the contract and losing, up to the $15,000. Okay, hear what I say, up to. I didn't say the entire amount, up to $15,000. Okay, what is your position right now, Jesse, in regards to the loan contingency?
Well, first question is there any way we can increase the days? Like instead of it being 21 days, can we go back to, the other agent and say, hey, can we extend this date? And secondly, I'm a little worried about the potential of losing any money, considering how long I've worked to save all that money.
Okay. Yeah, that's a fair statement to say. And this is why you hired a professional like myself to help navigate through this process. Jesse, I've been in communications with the lender. The lender has given us the green thumb in regards to you being approved for it. Now, Jesse, I can definitely ask the listing agent if you want a little bit of peace of mind for an extension of time to release this as a condition. But there's no guarantee that the seller will grant us any extension of time to release this as a condition, because you agreed to this originally based on the contract that within 21 days you will release this as a condition. If the seller says no to it and we do not release this contingency, then we're in breach of the contract, and therefore what the seller will do is give us a notice to perform. That notice to perform, Jesse, is basically a warning. That warning saying, hey, buyer, we've given you the time necessary to release this as a condition, which is 21 days. You have not released this, so we're giving you 48 hours to consider releasing this. And if you don't release it, that's perfectly fine. Then we have the right to cancel this agreement, meaning that the seller can cancel on us and therefore put the property back on the market, subject to cancellation of your position. So the only thing I can say, Jesse, is we can ask the listing agent and the seller and grant us that extension. But if that's the case, how much time are we looking to extend?
Well, I don't know. I guess we would have to speak to the lender and find out how much more time they will need. Okay. I'm just trying to avoid losing any potential opportunity, whether it being, not getting this home and or, losing any money, that I saved.
Yeah. And this is, again, going back to what I'm saying. My goal is to help you navigate and purchase this property. Now, this is, again, the last layer of this contingency. Once we release this, you still have the right to cancel. Okay, so just because you release this doesn't mean that you're obligated to purchase this property. But what you're also saying is that you may be in potential of breaching the contract and therefore a potential of forfeiting, up to the $15,000 that is currently in escrow. So I need to be, you and I need to be in agreement and that you're 100% sure that this is the avenue and property that you want. Because again, by releasing this, now we're saying we're going to close this deal and you're going to be the owner of this beautiful house. So the only thing I can say is we can ask the listing agent for an extension. Now, from my personal experience, Jesse, I've seen that they'll grant us the extension for an extra 5 days or 7 days. But sometimes by giving us that extension, they may want us to give a little bit of deposit, meaning it's what we call a give and take. Okay, we give a little, we take a little. They may come back and say, look, we'll grant and extend you the extension to release that as a condition. And if by doing so, the buyer is asked, or excuse me, the seller is asking that the buyer release $5,000 immediately from escrow to the seller. Are you in the position to do so?
Yes, if yeah, I don't want to lose this house, and I really,
Okay.
really want this house. And, you know, I will definitely be in touch with the lender, and maybe you can reach out to them too, and to see what the status is or what the holdup is.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. All right. I'll be in communications with the lender to make sure that we're on track to get this condition met and released. But I will ask the lender, how much more time do we need in order for us to release that as a condition? And then once I get that from the lender, then I know how to have that conversation with the listing agent. My goal is to ultimately give you the extension without releasing, but worst case scenario, again, they may ask in return of giving us the extension, they may ask for a little bit of deposit be given to the seller in good faith. So I just want to make sure that we're both on the same page, because I don't want to be going back and forth. I want to be able to have that conversation with the listing agent and saying, hey, you know what? I've already got the okay from the buyer that they're willing to release a portion of the deposit in good faith that we're going to close this deal. All right, so we'll do this.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. All right, guys, so that's a conversation that I would have with someone when it comes to the 21-day condition. Now, for the most part right now, because of the COVID situation, it has definitely impacted the lenders, it's impacted underwriters, processors, everyone that's working around the clock to get this deal. You may want to ask for an extension, but here's how you protect yourself with that, is you go back to the original page, and here, instead of doing 30 days, I would say let's do 40 or 45-day escrow, okay? That way it gives the lender that peace of mind that they have enough time to process, submit it for underwriting approval, any conditions, and then ultimately the back and forth that the lender needs in order to close this deal. You know, if it was just a normal market, then I would say 30 days or 25 days would be ideal. But right now we're dealing with so many loans, so many refinance, low interest rates, that it's impacting the lenders, and they're working, you know, immense hours to get these deals that they're not meeting their timelines. So going back when submitting an offer, again, as I told you guys last time, have that conversation with the listing agent to see what the sellers need and want. The sellers may not need a fast closing. They may need extra time to identify and find another property. They may be moving out of state, that they need that extra time. So that 40, 45 day is perfect for them. But having that conversation with the agent will give you that perspective and the answer to your question. So that way you're not under pressure, the lender is not under pressure, and we can close this as smooth as possible, okay? Now, if you release on section 4, no loan contingency, what you're basically saying is that it's not upon a loan qualifications. So here's another strategy that agents use. So there's two components how you can approach this. You can go to the first page and put section C, all cash offer, meaning that the buyer does not need any type of financing to qualify. If the buyer submits an all cash offer, guys, you know, one thing that you need to know and stress, and this is from both angles, representing a buyer or representing a seller, you want to show that the buyer has the means to pay cash, meaning proof of funds. So if the amount is 1.2 million is the offer, but the proof of funds only shows 900,000 on their bank account, there's definitely a discrepancy. Where's the remainder of the 300,000? Is it in another account? You need to show all plus closing costs. So if they show 1.2 is all they have, there's still going to be another $30,000, $40,000 in closing costs and fees. You got to show for all that stuff. So don't be in a position that, oh yeah, they got the funds, but the funds that they have is the same amount. So be very careful. Analyze the bank or proof of funds, and show worth that the buyer has the ability to close this deal. Okay. So the other avenue that you can do is, let's say that they don't have the all cash, but they're putting a substantial amount, which in this case they're putting, about $395,000 into escrow. So they're going to be more than capable of qualifying. So you can release that as a condition, even though they're financing. But if they're putting anywhere from 25, 30, 35, 40, up to 50% down, then the finance amount is very small here. Therefore, the underwriter is not going to see it as a risk because they're putting a substantial amount of money into the purchase of the home. So you can use this as a layer to get your offer accepted by releasing that it's not contingent on the loan because, one, you're putting such a large amount. Or you can uncheck this and put, look, we will give you a loan contingency removal instead of 21 days, we can do it in 10 days. That's how confident we are that it's going to be okay. One, they have high FICO scores, they have a good solid job, they make good money, and they're putting a substantial amount of income. And they don't have that much assets, so their DTL, or their loan to value, LTL, I should say, loan to value is extremely low. How do you know that? Is you can ask the lender to see their ratios, their front end ratios and their back end ratios, okay? When qualifying a prospective buyer, they look at the ratios, front end and back end, meaning the income that they make plus the debt that they have, and then what their monthly payment is going to be to their income that they're going to make. It cannot exceed over 48% on their back end. If it's more than that, that means that they have too much debt and cannot sustain an additional $4,000, $5,000 mortgage. So asking those conversations with the lender is, what is their ratios? If the ratios are in between the 28 and 48, then they should be golden. Even if they're carrying a second mortgage, 2 car payments, credit card debt, student loans, who knows what else they have. But if their income sustains that, and ultimately their new monthly payment is something they can sustain as well, and plus their debt, they can have 2 to 3 mortgages and still buy another property because they have the income to do so. And this is why you got to educate yourselves and knowing the ratios, and you can ask the lender for those figures, because if they're tight, as a listing agent, that may be a concern. Any little tweak in their finances or their debt can alter a position from a buyer standpoint that they may not qualify. So I, as a listing agent, would like to see their ratios, and how you get those ratios is on a DU. A DU will provide you with their front end and back end ratio based on what they pulled up on the credit report to determine what they have: car payments, student loans, credit card debt, house mortgage payment, so on and so forth. That as a listing, receiving an offer, looking at their financials and looking at their DU, desk underwriting approval, I would look at their front and back end ratios, because then you'll know if you need to release this as a condition, because they're more than qualified to purchase this home based on the price point. Okay. Only release this if your buyers are in a position to do so from the very beginning. If they're not, then be very cautious and give yourself the 21 days to release that as a condition. Now, again, the way the market is right now, you got to be very careful as well, because again, you're going to be in a multiple offer situation. You don't want to be in a position where you're forced to release that, but without really doing your homework, okay? Now, Section 4 talks about the sale of buyer's property, which is the COP, that if the buyer has to sell their property in order to purchase this new property, basically that's where the down payment is coming from. The agreement is as follows. Buyer's ability to obtain finance is not a contingent upon the sale of any property owned by the buyer. But if it is, then you got to check this, guys. And what happens is when you check that, it automatically populates the COP. This agreement and buyer's ability to obtain finance, it is contingent upon the sale of the property owned by the buyer as specified in the attached COP. All right. So if that's the case, then ultimately you would check this off. If they need the proceeds of the sale, okay, if they need the proceeds of the sale, then this is the position that you need to check in order for you to be in compliance and protect the buyer, because if they cannot sell their home, they're not going to be able to purchase this home. So by protecting the buyer is you would put this COP in place, okay? Addendums and advisories. So these are addendums that comply if you're in that position that needs to be in. So if it's a backup offer addendum, if you submitted an offer and you know that you're not going to get your offer accepted, but you're willing to still submit this offer, make sure that you check off backup offer addendum. What it is basically that if the buyer that's currently in escrow does not perform, they cancel, you're now in a position of 1, 2, or 3, meaning you're in position 1, position 2, position 3. If the property has a septic tank, you don't see that here in the South Bay, but if it is out in the rural areas such as, you know, the mountains, out in the high deserts where they're not connected to the city, then you would check off the septic tank. Right now, we're not seeing too many short sales. Too many short sales on homes, but you also have that ability too as well if it is a short sale. Any additional addendums, if there's anything that pertains to this offer, you can add an addendum and you'll say it's addendum number 1. If it's a probate, then obviously you would check off that it's a probate. Any additional terms, then you can add an additional terms in respect to your position as well, okay? Let's say that they're asking for furniture or a classic vehicle in the property, then you can put here as part of the agreement is, you know, X, Y, and Z. Statewide, it's really not necessary to check that off just because as part of the seller disclosures, it's already provided. Some companies don't send the SBS form. Us, like here at Keller Williams, we provide that as part of the disclosure to the buyer, or excuse me, to the buyer as part of disclosures. There's certain real estate companies that don't. If you know for a fact that they won't, then you can request that as part of the agreement. If this is a real estate owned property, which stands for REO, real estate owned, it's bank owned foreclosed property, then obviously you would check that and then the proper form would populate as well. Any additional terms here, guys? If there's any additional terms that you want to add to the agreement, then this gives you the opportunity to add to it as well as part of that condition. Okay, there's plenty of room to add any additional terms. Now let's go quickly, real quick, to just this section, section B, 7B, 1, 2, 3, and then government requirements and retrofit. So inspections and reports and certificates is the next part of this condition. So in our position, we always ask that the seller pay for the natural hazard disclosure, which is the NHD. If you want to get an environmental, then you would check that off. If you want to know which provider, you can pick from many of them. You know, you can use my NHD, or, you know, if you have a preferred vendor, such as I use Snap NHD as a provider. My apologies. You can put here, or you can put seller choice of service. So meaning that if you don't have a particular provider, you can always have the seller provide you with that. Okay. Section 2 and 3, seller shall pay for the following. I usually pay buyer will do a home inspection. Buyer can do a termite, or you can ask that the seller do a termite report. I wouldn't necessarily ask for a completion and clearance, because again, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot too early on the process. I think as part of the request of repairs is to get the termite inspection done. And then once you prepare the request of repairs, throw that as a position that the buyer is requesting that the termite be completed. Don't put it on in the beginning, and I see that quite often. Back in the days, it used to show that the termite was part of the purchase agreement of Section 1 and Section 2. That has been eliminated. Now it's part of your request of repairs, guys, okay? Last but not least, the government requirements and retrofit. Usually the seller will pay for smoke alarm, carbon monoxide device, installations, and water heating brace. That's part of usually the seller's position. But also if the property is exempt, you know, then they do not have to provide that as part of the condition. But I would always check this as part of the condition, okay? All right, guys, I gotta cut now just because the girls are going to be doing a class at 3:15 right now, and they have to use my account. Any questions to part 2? All right, no questions. I know it's a lot of information, guys, and I really just want to dissect it to really give you a perspective on how and why we do what we do in the purchase agreement. So I'll continue part 3 of it, and we'll really dive into really the ins and outs of, you know, the components, because the 3 major components of the purchase agreement is page 1, page 2, and page 3. The rest of the RPA, it's basically just disclosures, conditions, the responsibility of the buyer, responsibility of the seller, and then we'll go through the motions, and then we should be able to wrap it up, okay? So yes.
This is Luke Maggio. Could you just repeat really quickly the termites? Did you say it's common or not common to request for the sellers to provide?
It is common to provide for a termite report, but it's not common to ask for completion of that. So you can put on the purchase agreement buyer to pay for a termite report. And then the seller, if agreed upon, they can say, yeah, we'll go ahead and take care of the termite report. Whatever the report and finding can be negotiated as part of the request of repairs. Now, you can also put it that the buyer can also get the termite company, because they may have a preference. So part of your home inspections, sewer inspections, roof inspections, termite inspections, the buyer can gather all those inspections during your contingency period, your physical inspection contingency, and therefore, once they get all the reports, send out a request for repairs. But what I'm saying, Luke, is don't add the language of seller to pay for the termite clearance of Section 1. Now, going back to the original conversation I had with Rosie last time, you know, having that conversation, just like I did with Jesse, is, hey, is the seller compelled to pay for a termite inspection? What are the sellers asking? What are the requirements? What escrow company, what title company are you guys using? You can put that into the report or the purchase agreement as an avenue to really clean up this offer. And if they say, yeah, the company, the sellers will pay for a termite, then by all means, add it into the purchase agreement. But from my experience, Luke, I would say no. Don't add the completion. Add the request for the report, but not the completion. Okay.
And will a general home inspector, if there is termite problems, usually at least pick up on that and then recommend a better, more in-depth termite inspection, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the answer is no. The home inspection may note that there's some wood rot, but they're not going to determine if it's termite related. So this is why I recommend that you get the professional out there, which is a termite company, a termite person, to actually evaluate the condition of the property, because they're the ones that do it on a daily basis. So I would say that if there's something, because a home inspection is a general inspection. If it's if the home inspections flags the AC flags certain sections of the property, then you want to get a third company, such an electrical, a plumber, a AC guy, contractor, a roofer, soil, stuff of that nature, because the home inspection is a general inspection. They're not going to tell you what the cause, what the overall condition of it. They're just going to say, based on my findings, the AC was not cool enough, did not turn on. I mean, there's so many variables. The termite is the same component. We don't know until we actually get an estimate of what the findings and the infestation of termites to determine what the cost is going to be.
Okay, thank you.
All right, guys. That's all I have for now. I hope, it's valuable information, guys. We'll continue. I'm not sure if we'll have it next week, but just be on the lookout for the calendar to finish up with the purchase agreement, okay? Any last questions? All right, guys.
I had one real quick one. I'm sorry. Who determines the additional financing terms? Is it the lender?
The additional finance terms?
Yeah, financing terms on page 1 when you said,
Okay.
if the client
So
wants.
the lender would ultimately tell you, hey, you know what, Jesse, the buyers only have enough for a down payment, but they're going to need some assistance with the closing costs. You may want to ask the seller if they're willing to contribute a percentage of the assistance to the buyer on closing costs. So the lender would be the one telling you.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, guys. All right, guys. Appreciate you all. Don't forget we have a sales meeting tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Okay. Hope to see you guys all.